Phew. All right, guys, I'm going to assume that I am live. I got my setup here, and as always, I'm sort of like, wow. YouTube is just amazing. It used to be so much simpler to do this stuff. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today pretty much is the evolution of a comic book collector. A couple months ago, I was supposed to do this presentation at a comic book convention, and it fell through. So I'm going to kind of shoot from the hip here on a rainy Sunday. All right, good morning, guys. What's going on? So it kind of fell through, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. It's a rainy Sunday. We all know that's comic book time when it's raining and stuff. And I didn't sleep worth a crap last night, so we'll see what's going on. Comic fan, I was just reading some Commandy. You are doing it right, my friend. I got the comic book room cleaned up here yesterday. I ended up spending, I don't know, 6 hours off and on, little breaks here and there, phone calls, lunch and stuff. Didn't hit it straight through, but it's kind of weird digging stuff out for a video today. All right, guys, so we have people out there. Commandy is my catnip. Yeah, it is. All right, guys, so the evolution of a comic book collector, I'm just kind of, this is one of these topics that I only go by life experience. I've never actually read any kind of article that somebody made up. I've never seen anything that somebody actually sat down and studied or anything. But I've noticed a lot of trends because I've been reading and collecting since 1977. Sometimes I feel like a broke record, for saying that so much. But basically, the biggest thing about the comics is to start collecting is how you get started. Now, for me, I just found a bunch of comic books in a room. They were in bags and all this stuff like that. And ended up being my stepdad's and my uncle's comic books. I was like 4 or 5 years old, and it was actually raining. That's what I remember. And I started digging through all this stuff and started reading. And I actually still have some of those books. Found out comic books were like horror books, and here's the original Thor annual with the Guardians in it, and I show these a lot because I've held on to these. Here's the torn up books and stuff like that, and the upgrade I did back in the day. Oh, okay, Eric, man. Well, you can catch it around the next time and stuff. But the thing about it is that as a kid, the four color comics and everything like that just blew me away. Um, and I was like hooked. I sit there and I studied it and I read them and stuff like that for 4 or 5 days. I was going through magazines and things like that. And I've actually got around to replacing some of the comics because a lot of those comics that were from the 60s and early 70s and stuff that were in those collections were coverless comic books. Um, and I just like where I studied them stuff, it was everything about the comics that blew me away. I recognized different styles of art, even though I didn't know who the artists were. The gutters in between, the way the splash pages, the drama, I actually felt the flow. The ads in the comic books were as much a part of the comic as the story in my mind. It was everything that's kind of hooked me. The letter pages, it just blew my mind. There were people out there who read this, wrote letters, and the stories were just amazing. And at the time, the thing about comic book collecting is that I don't think people really think about what else comes with collecting. And that, for me, it was TV shows and Saturday morning cartoons. And then we had the Superman movie. Saturday morning cartoons had like the Harlem Globetrotters as superheroes. You had the Robotic Stooges pop up, Hong Kong Phooey, Blue Falcon, and Dynamite. And then you had TV shows like The Incredible Hulk and Wonder Woman. You had the Christopher Reeve Superman movie come out that was making you believe a man could fly. All of a sudden, it was, for me, it was everywhere. I didn't stand a chance. So this stuff actually became as common in my mind as a television set or a book in your house, right? It was that sort of entertainment. So the thing about it is that when it comes to a comic book collecting and things like that, it's, yeah, Isis and Shazam, Far Out Space Nuts. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Um, This is gonna be a good one, man. This is gonna be a good show here. I can already tell. We've already got some feedback here. Ponadius. When I was 6, I had a drawer full of comics that people had given me. That's how I got started. Scott Connor, Aisha Shazam, Far Out Space Nuts. Yeah, absolutely. Comic fan. I just got a Hong Kong Fooey #1 this week. Oh, that's cool. I have the Hong Kong Fooey Black Lightning book downstairs. I'm gonna try to read today if I can get coherent. So, how do you get started, man? Maybe you just eyeball a book in there. Maybe it's through family. Maybe you find a stack of them. Now, in today's world, with the Marvel movies being so big and everything like that, people actively go out and find this stuff too at the same time, and it's overwhelming what's out there. So, as a comic book collector, that's where the evolution comes in. However, you got to the books, you found the books, and see, I looked up. I had a variety of stuff, man. I mean, I was reading Conan and these great big huge treasury editions. There were Conan, Savage Sword of Conan magazines everywhere, Savage Tales everywhere. There was X-Men #3 from the '60s, the original one, in my house. So I was getting, I didn't have I didn't have the names of the genres and stuff like that, but I was reading sci-fi, straight out science fiction, super goofy Walt Disney books. I was going out there and getting them. And then finally, I kind of found my niche because this is the first book that I ended up buying when I was 6 years old with my own money, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. So that's where I kind of got hooked with something that was mine. I was reading the things that were around me, and it was introducing me to comics, and it was blowing me away. We had Star Wars too, so a lot of the books I was reading was influenced by Star Wars, or they referenced Star Wars and stuff. And as a kid, that's what I mean. There's things that in the evolution of you becoming a collector, they influence you, even if you don't know it. So that's what kind of gets me. You start getting out there, and I was lucky. It was really cheap back then to do it. I would go through the laundry, I would go through the couches and stuff, and I would have a bowl full of change and stuff. I would have so much change that I would find around the neighborhood and stuff like that, that my parents would steal it from me. Or sometimes they would ask, but I knew when they did it, and I was constantly counting my money. Now, this was also around the time where I would get on a big wheel and I would go around the neighborhood and collect bottles to get it. All of a sudden, it kind of, as a comic book collector, it's sort of like you get a drive to go out and do this. You know what I mean? You kind of you start finding things that you want, or you just know you. It's not so much the thrill of the hunt, but it's the fact that it's a kind of a sort of exciting to go out and try to find books and stuff. Back then you never knew what was going to be on the stands. You never knew what you were going to find. Here we go. Scott Connor, I remember going over to a babysitter's house as a very small kid, but some kids there had some comics, which of course I didn't recognize at the time, but they were Sea Devils by Russ Heath. Russ Heath and those Sea Devils, the art in them. My favorite issue is the Octopus Man. Holy shit. That may be a Grail book for me. That was such a good one. Paulo Costa, as a kid, I would read everything in comic form, even promo comics from the cereal boxes. Unfortunately, idiot me didn't save those because at the time I thought they weren't real comics. Yeah, I'm with you. Now, Paulo, you kind of made me remember something, but the schools actually started giving out comic books, and they were actually made by Radio Shack, and I think I have some somewhere, but they were like electronic books. You'd have these two kids traveling around town on their bikes and stuff, and I think they were using like CBs and all the stuff you get at Radio Shack. Totally promotional. Now, the biggest thing that also influenced my comic book collecting was the Sunday Funnies. I have been a huge Peanuts by Charles Schulz fan. I call him Charlie Brown since I was a kid. And I started finding like little hardbacks and stuff. And unfortunately, I took them downstairs. If I had not cleaned my room, I would pick up a big stack. Actually, they're up there, but I'm not going to get them. So the comic strips actually to me was just another form of that sequential storytelling. You know what I mean? Mad Magazine, the Don Martin paperback books and stuff of his Captain Klutz and stuff like that. This stuff was everywhere, TV and everything like that. So I would go around and I would collect bottles, like I was saying, and I would run across the road. I would sneak because I was so young I wasn't supposed to cross the road, and I would cash in bottles. Now this is when comic books were like 35 cents and stuff, and you actually the neighborhood started seeing me doing this, right? Like I was like a neighborhood kid. I didn't really talk to anybody. I had two, three friends around there, and everybody would come out and catch lightning bugs in the afternoon. But I started finding bottles real easy, and I started realizing the people in the neighborhood were leaving them out by the side of the road or on their porch for me. So I was actually getting some money. And I would take some of that money and get candy, trading cards, Superman the movie trading cards, Kiss trading cards. And then I would get a peach knee high, some candy, get a milk crate, start playing a pinball machine and stuff, right? Until I could get somewhere in town. When I would always be asking the parents or anybody that came over, like, we're going to town. You want to go to town? We're going over here. I mean, I lived in town, and where I could get comic books was probably a mile in one direction and 3 miles in the other directions at the newsstands and stuff, little drugstores. So all of a sudden, it's sort of like it's always in the back of your mind, and you're at that time where you couldn't go out and just get books at any time. When I was little, you end up rereading and reading the books that you have, and if you had it and stuff, you get all excited. Do I still draw? Yes, I still draw. I'm actually going to do some sketching today. Maybe I don't know. I'm having a day where I'm trying to just kind of relax and enjoy it. Also, in elementary school, when you got the Scholastic Weekly Reader order sheets, I remember getting Pizzazz magazine published by Marvel. Scott is just a few years older than me. I would find the Pizzazz magazine that he's talking about like at dentist office and doctor's offices, and they would be old and people would already wrote in them. Nice, man. So anyway, you get that thrill of the hunt. However you do it, and stuff. You start thinking about books. You start seeing ads in the comics and stuff, and it kind of led you to where you were going. Now, like I said, it's much different today than what it was, but I think some of this still applies. It's just the context. You know, today you probably have the internet, you have YouTube videos, you have the Marvel movies. Um, you know, you got all the uh, how can I say? You have the parasitic uh, comic book news sites, if you will. And then all of a sudden, what kind of happens is as you get older and stuff like that, you will find those stories that just click with you and they become your favorite stories. You've gone from reading comic books and learn about all these characters and stuff. And for me, I really considered myself a collector in 1982 with Justice League and the All Star Squadron crossing over. Okay, I think this was like Justice League 207 to 209, something like that. I'm not going to dig them out. In All Star Squadron, it had the Justice Society. That clicked with me. This story came out of The Flash, where Professor Zoom killed, and I'm all of a sudden I'm just like really into some of these stories. And then like the Green Lantern Corps, I would read Green Lantern. It's in some of the bashed up coverless comics I showed there. Green Lantern and Green Arrow. The Replicon that Paulo and I think we're talking about and stuff like that. Those little stories were popping up. Super Friends was still going. And then all of a sudden these specials would come out. Now this is 85. This is just an example. But in the back of the Green Lantern books, they would have Tales of the Green Lantern here. My timeline might be a little messed up, but I think you get the idea. So all of a sudden, you start becoming knowledgeable of the books. You go from just wanting to find some comics and just wanting to read them and the art and stuff, and then all of a sudden, it starts clicking with you, and you start absorbing it, and you start being a little bit more critical about what you read and stuff. You start having these, seriously, you have expectations. So now that you've evolved from like somebody just soaking it all up and seeing what all is out there, you start really noticing stories and things that you really want to make sense and stuff. You get what I'm saying? Or you start realizing this has been done before, or you're like, hey, Green Arrow doesn't act like this. You know, and he acts, and the way he acts in Justice League and the way he acted in the Green Arrow, Green Lantern is completely different. So all of a sudden, your brain starts putting everything together, and you absorb it you're there. All of a sudden, these characters sort of become living and breathing. You understand them. You don't even realize it, and at the whole time that you're doing this, for me, the comic book collecting was something that was just in my room or in at the store. Real quick I realized that there was like a big stigma on comics and stuff like that, and I really didn't care. My attitude was these are people who are missing out. I mean, I had this whole secret little, I guess, hobby at the time that I was really into. I didn't hide it, but I didn't go out and push it on people and talk about it. What's the big white book? Oh, here we go. Matilda, I might share one day. I have a few, two or three pictures on Instagram. I'm gonna try to stay kind of on topic today here. Scott Connor's on there with ads. I always loved the old Russ Heath did. I always loved the ones Russ Heath did for the Roman soldiers. And the one Jack Davis did with Dr. J and Rick Barry. Dr. J was the man. When I was a kid, it was Dr. J. By the time Michael Jordan came along, I was not impressed because I saw Dr. J already do all that stuff. My favorite ad, of course, was the Sea Monkey one, and the one where you can go to college and you had the dude up in the corner and he had his hair parted and he had a little shirt and tie, and I've always wondered who the hell that was, you know. But that's who was it? Joe Orlando did the Sea Monkeys ad. That was fantastic. Okay, what do we got? What's the big white book behind you? Okay, this big white book, that's a slip case for The Dark Knight Returns. There's 7 hardbacks in that. Dr. J is still the man. Yes, he is. So all of a sudden, you kind of evolved with your collecting. Getting back on topic, evolved with your collecting, and now you're getting a little bit more critical. You're kind of going back into books. And for me, it was around this time that I would have little stacks of comics everywhere, and I stopped flipping the Jack Kirby covers and stuff over because they scared me. And all of a sudden, I was able to read this OMAC and I was revisiting things that I didn't want to read at the time. As I was going, now by this time I'm already like 9 or 10. You know what I mean? I've already been doing this for a couple of years, which is hilarious to me. But I think all of a sudden you start understanding the structure of a comic, even if you don't have the words, you understand the storytelling, and you kind of get hungry for it. You hopefully, if you haven't gotten stuck to a brand or a character, or kind of like in a bubble with what you're reading, you start expanding on what you're reading and stuff, right? And this is where I started like slowing down and I started looking at names of people. This is the first comic that I can remember wanting to know who worked on it. And I was trying to figure out who worked at Marvel and who worked at DC. So not only are you starting to get critical of the comics, you reach a point where you start understanding who works where. You start recognizing names and art styles and stuff. You really start getting enmeshed in it, and you start finding the people that you like. John Buscema. It was this very issue here that I started realizing John Buscema had a very Frank Frazetta sort of style to a certain extent. And I also didn't have the words, but I felt like his Conan stuff was so much more dynamic than anything else he did. Well, it turns out years later I would find out that he hated drawing superheroes and he wanted to do things like Tarzan and Conan and things like that. So you start really seeing things. You get critical, you're absorbing it. Now, I'm a little bit different because anything I did or watched, I had this kind of imagination where I would try to connect movies and TV shows and stuff like that. So I always saw the big picture of things, and I would try to connect it in my head. Uh, here we go. Once I started getting back into comics again after college, I found comics related magazines with creator interviews, and it snowballed from there. And Matilda Gothica says there's some art styles. Yeah. Hey, Charlton66, what's going on, man? Just talking about being a collector and stuff, right? So all of a sudden you start finding the kind of books and the genres you like and stuff, man. And I remember the Conan, big time, with me was something that kind of grabbed me. And funnily enough, in my mind, John Buscema was the Conan artist, and who's this Barry Winslow Smith? Now I'm like 11 or 12 now. I'd already seen this stuff, but I'm now learning the names. You start getting more knowledgeable. You start wanting to know more about things. And then all of a sudden you would find things like this. This is a treasure edition, and it's got a couple of stories, but these are like collected Marvel 2-in-1 stories. All of a sudden it dawned on me that I started wanting these books, the originals. So you start getting more ambitious with your collecting. Now we call them grails and stuff. And honestly, when it comes to like YouTube at least, I'm the guy that tagged the word grail. Or you can go back, I have a video and stuff about finding my grail, which was a Johnny Quest, and I never saw it used before then. All right. They should all be that big. Yeah, that's what she said. The ones you're holding, yeah. I enjoyed the chart yesterday, although I missed it live. I enjoyed the chat yesterday, although I missed it live. Well, I'm glad you're here today, man. Glad you're here today. I'm finally recovering from a lot of stuff. And finally get to kind of relax and just shoot the breeze and stuff, right? So the whole thing about comic books is like it's an evolution. You have fun with it. You read things that you enjoy. You start really getting into an artist or a writer, and usually that's around the time that people will kind of, you know, comic books weren't that expensive back in the day like they are now. So you could take more chances and stuff, right? But there were things that you would hook you. You would be sitting there going to the spinner rack and wondering what you could get, and then you get the competition. Now, this is the funniest part of comic books for me, looking back on it, because I don't think we have that now at all. I really don't. I think you can get it on. It's too easy to order comic books online, get a pull list. There's really no excuse and stuff. A lot of people will try to jump on a book after it's hot. But the thing with me is it started becoming the spinner racks. You had to hurry up and get. I would get off the bus, and I would run straight to a store and stuff as I got older. And then because you didn't know who these people were, but you were in competition with people to get a book off the rack before it was gone. You had an invisible enemy, an invisible competitor. You didn't know who each other was. You'd have 5 to 10 books in a slot on a spinner rack, flipping around and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, like for me, it was Batman: The Outsiders. Somebody was collecting Batman: The Outsiders, and I missed the first appearance of the Cryogenic Man. You know what I mean? I'm like, who was this son of a bitch? I'm like 10 years old, flipping out like, who's this son of a bitch that bought it? Nobody, you know what I mean? I didn't know who the people were around town who were collecting comic books, but I couldn't believe we never crossed over and stuff, right? And that's what's kind of fun. You start getting this awareness that there are people out there locally reading it, right? And that's a little bit different today, thanks to the internet, also. Um, the best superhero. Oh, I'm missing some of these. I'm afraid to mess with it. Let me see if I can back the comments up. Paulo had a really good comment there that I wanted to read. Yeah, Conan can still be reasonably priced. I think people are talking about prices and stuff. If they released a Treasury size Micronauts back when I was 11, I would have lost my mind. Yeah, that's another part of the evolution I was getting ready to get at, Scott. Very good, very good. Remember when we thought books were rare and we couldn't find it at a convenience store or a comic book shop within 10 miles? Yep. There aren't any treasures, but there's a Baxter Paper reprint series with Mike Golden's Micronaut series. Okay, people are getting, okay, that's what we're getting at here, right? So you have the invisible enemies, good stuff like that, right? So, and it was a competitive thing. You didn't really hate these people. You were just emotional and pissed because you missed a comic and you felt like you were more loyal to that than these other people. I mean, you didn't know that, right? But then some magic happens, right? I don't think I saw another person with a comic book probably until I was like in fifth. No, well, take that back. In kindergarten, um, right when I was starting to read after I'd already been reading these books and stuff like that, you would get on the bus and they would seat you by age and grade. So if you were smaller in kindergarten, you sat at the front of the bus and went on back. And I remember seeing some fifth grader with a stack of comic books like this big. And I know they were like adventure comics and stuff like that because they were big. But I was sitting there dying because he lifted one up and it was a pinup of Hawkman, and he had his helmet off. He had black hair. He had his helmet, his hawk helmet, underneath his arm, and he was standing on a jet with the pilot sitting there kind of freaking out, and there's like these clouds flying by. I've never found that, and I couldn't go to talk to him. So anyway, years later, probably around sixth grade, I walked in and damn, what was the book? I just went blank on it. But I think it was, believe it or not, I think it was John Burns' Superman, Man of Steel. All of a sudden, it was like I looked around. We would go into the cafeteria and sit down in middle school, and I looked down. And I started seeing one or two people here holding up comics. So all of a sudden, we would, going back to fourth grade though, you would have like little talks about superheroes and stuff, thanks to the cartoons. But all of a sudden, you start kind of finding people and having these conversations, and it kind of goes back to a little bit what Scott Connor was saying there about a Micronaut Treasury Edition. All of a sudden, you do two things. You start coming up with stories and characters you'd like to see, and then you start realizing that you have your favorites not getting the same treatment like a bigger book like Batman. But Blackest Night blew me away, and Jeff Johns has done this a couple times. It's not so much I'm saying we're like kindred spirits, but Jeff Johns and Brad Meltzer and a bunch of guys are around the same age as I am, and they've done some stuff that I talked with comic book fans on the back of the bus. Why not have a red lantern and an orange lantern and stuff like that? Blackest Night was one that was just shaking my head. Sinestro Corps war about why can't there be all these other color rings and stuff, right? So that's the next evolution. You start getting creative with it. You start drawing these characters and you start doodling and stuff. You start becoming active. It's like a good rock and roll band. They'll make you pick up a guitar. The Micronauts are awesome. The comics and the toys. I have a complete run. Okay, we're talking about that. Man, Micronauts has a huge freaking cult following, man. I have seen more Micronaut fans in the last 3 years than I saw my entire life. Even when they crossed over the Micronauts with the X-Men back in the 80s in that miniseries, I would see those things laying around everywhere. And the Micronaut stuff has just been drying up. Uh, Hey, somebody finally made it to a stream. Way to go. The Argyle Lantern series didn't last long. Yeah, I know they were bad guys. It's a joke, Matilda. He's making a joke. Okay, so here we go with the evolution. You start finding people, and you're kind of. But I love that part of the collecting when I started realizing people were aware. I was becoming aware there were other people in town that really collected comics. They're out there somewhere. It's a little bit of a curiosity and thing. And then to find some people kind of getting into comics. Now, the thing about my friends in middle school and stuff like that, I was already way ahead of them on reading this stuff. I was also, I mean, you understand, I was reading, I mean, I was just, I don't like the term geek, but I definitely knew who Eric Asimov was, Michael Moorcock, Roy Thomas and comics and treasury editions and stuff like that. Conan kind of led me to some of these books. The pulp magazines were, we had shelves and shelves of pulp novels in the house. Destroyer, all these things that were adventure. You get what I'm saying? And the movies and stuff. So already kind of, I was the guy that was telling them about them. And then it happened. I met one guy. One guy was in seventh grade, and I'm not going to mention his name. Scott Connor's going to know who I'm talking about. But I was sitting, seriously, I was sitting in my room. The mom and nobody ever bothered me in the house, you know, seriously, unless they wanted me to babysit or something. And all of a sudden, mom worked at the cafeteria in a hospital, and she busted into my room and said that there's this boy who's into comic books. He's the same age as I am. She's going to take me to his house, and I'm going to be nice to him, and I'm going to be his friend. And I'm like, what the hell? And ended up being a guy that I knew for decades after this because his mom was a nurse in the same hospital my mom worked. And we get in there, and this guy was a comic book collector. And he was real knowledgeable. I finally had somebody I could spar with talking about things. He was a huge John Byrne nut. You know, he's a Marvel nut at the time, and I'm the DC guy. And he's trying to tell me about Neil Adams, and I'm telling him about Neil Adams and stuff. So I had this guy who finally was there, and we were sparring back and forth. And to be honest with you, at first I think he was happy, but then it was sort of like he would get really aggravated with talking about it. Once you found other Sandman fans, you'd always had a good conversation about those books. Absolutely, man. Yeah. Rom was one of the best series of the 80s. I think it's highly underrated. Okay, my brother was a huge Rom fan, right? I would see those. Charlton 66, I have the book here somewhere where you gave me the book, the Rom book, where you had a letter in it. I think I said it over there. So I know you're a Rom fan. You got the cred there. You're actually in the book. Hey, Mind the Comics is here. Awesome. I finally got a hold of a ROM number one this week. I'm finally cracking it open. And they should have had a compilation of those on CD-ROM. Scott's on fire this morning. The best thing about ROM was almost every issue had other superheroes first starring Eric Bean. Okay, so so that's what I'm getting at with the evolution. And then all of a sudden, I think after so long of reading this, you have the burnout. You start. I mean, there's parts of it that ebbs and flows when you're in it for a while, right? You start trying to figure out how to store your books. You start trying to figure out how to have room for your books. You start realizing that now that you've read a lot of material, you know what's crap, you know what's good, and you kind of want to get rid of it. And you start figuring out the things like the trading part of it, how to sell books, how to when you're in the collecting for a while, there's so much more than just holding the book. Um, how do you get rid of books? Because you get this thing where you start worrying about the condition and stuff. Then you get into the pitfall eventually, and this is the part of the evolution of collecting where there's no telling where this will pop up in your timeline of collecting. But it was the one that made me miserable in the 90s, and I think I just did it for like 6 months. It was a different time back then, man. But you start getting into the condition and value of a comic, and that was just the most miserable time for me. And that's also when you start finding people who are just in it for investments and monies and stuff. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that part of it, but to me, there's just something about somebody not having joy in comics and me talking to them. And me keeping up, and then I was sitting there keeping up in the Wizard magazines and the Comics Buyer's Guide, the Comics Buyer's Guide Weekly. You know, it was in the '90s, everything was just coming out, and there was number ones from Image and a lot of competition, a lot of books. What's going to be worth more? And as soon as I stopped that stuff, because I was miserable doing it, man, all these hot books and stuff. As soon as I stopped doing that stuff, and I just started going through the comics again and just enjoying them, I ended up finding like early issues of the Tick. I found the first appearance of Hellboy in Next Men because I was a John Byrne fan, things like that. So the value guide of it just kind of kills me. Trying to find different ways to store your comics and stuff. I mean, you know, nowadays I was at the forefront of a lot of the stuff coming out. If you didn't have a comic book shop, so the first time I ever got a box and some bags and boards, it was amazing. Lucky I had several friends that I collected and read comics with traded to. Yeah, that's awesome. I was in a rural little town. So that's kind of why I'm saying I'm just using my experience. I was in a small town. Uh, CBG rocked. Yeah. I find my comic collecting has been a hobby that is a personal enjoyment, not always easy to share among the common folk. Yeah, I jokingly say muggles now. That's the only thing out of Harry Potter that I can enjoy is the idea of muggles. Hey, Reader 1717. Oh my God. It's been forever, girl. All right. Comic books have better ambassadors. Comic books never had better ambassadors than Don and Maggie Thompson. Okay, okay. I've had the numerous letters printed in CBG over the years. Oh, that's awesome, Charlton 66. Finally catching the live show. What's up, Howler? Doing all right, PG Zombie. PGH Zombie. Reader 17. Everybody's like, it's her, it's her. I'm in a small town. It's difficult to find books here sometimes. Count Von Strange, yeah. So the other thing is I'm kind of trying to stay on topic here is that you know after you've done this for a few years, you find some books that I luckily was around for the big change, right? You start hearing rumblings of books that were bringing people into comics. You started seeing ads for these comics. You started seeing articles on comics and stuff, and it was a direct market out there. You know, if you didn't have a comic book shop, you're going to miss this stuff. You start playing. I played around with subscriptions in the late '80s, and it was a nightmare. I ordered two series from Marvel, and well, it was Silver Surfer, and I don't remember what the other one was. And they ended up sending me Silver Surfer and X Force. They didn't give me the book I wanted. So I was, and then the books, you know, you start trying to really find different ways to get some books that you can't get around everywhere. You start getting a sense, a nose, if you will, like you can travel to another town. You just kind of have an idea that maybe this grocery store will have a magazine rack with some comics and stuff. You start becoming aware of it. You're not obsessed with it, but you're always kind of keeping an eye with it. That's another part of the evolution. You start getting a nose for it. You start thinking about looking at places you never would before. So, you know, but with accumulation, that's what I'm trying to get at here. With the accumulate, I'm trying to segue and it's not working. But anyway, there reaches a point in your collecting. I'll get to these in a minute here. But there comes a point in your collecting where you look around, you know, if you have boxes or the storage part of it or trying to figure out how to do some of the stuff where you're stuck with a whole bunch of books you'll never read again, you look around every now and then and you're like, what the hell have I done? There are points in time where you can actually hate your collection. Like, what have I done? What have I done? You know, you get a little bit overwhelmed with what you have. And it doesn't matter if it fills a room or if it's just a bunch of boxes you can fit under your bed. You will look at it at one point and just kind of shake your head. You can get sick of it. Met my first and only for many years comic buddy when we were both 13. I remember his over the top excitement, I guess, when he met him. Comments are flying by. Did you ever take a break from comics? For me, it was 16 to 24, right around the time I had a car and was dating with a little extra fun money. Ponadius, there's been two times that I took a break from comics. Okay, I mean, really just took a break. Um, Summer of '91. Well, no, that's not right because I ended up probably from 92 to sometime in 93 a little bit. There was 9 months I actually backpacked. We'll call it that. I backpacked up and down the East Coast states, riding with truckers and doing odd jobs and just going out. I reached a point where I had to get away from where I was at, and I just needed to get out of the house, and things fell apart at home and all this stuff. The parents split and all this stuff was going on, and I just took off. I was actually going to go to a girl's house to stay, and I had a green duffel bag like you saw in the army with all my clothes, all my cassettes and stuff, and I had my comic books stored at my grandmother's place, if I remember right. And I got a ride there to I was going to a girl's house that was about 60 miles away, and all of a sudden I got a ride about halfway, and then I started walking down this road, and I just looked around after 3 or 4 miles, and it was no big deal, and I'm like, I wonder how far I can go, and it turned out to be 9 months. So yeah, there was a 9 month break. And then when I was in the military and stuff like that, the basic, I don't know if I'd count it as a break, but no comics, no anything like that. But when I got a pass for the weekend, I would find a whole bunch of comics at a comic book shop and mail them back to my grandmother's house. Charlton 60. Yeah, what have I done? Yeah, Reader 17 like that. Charlton 66. I took a break when I went into the Navy in '85. Every time he left a hitchhiking adventure, the TV Incredible Hulk theme song played in the background. There was times I pretended that. Yeah. Considering you in a small town, when did comic shops start opening up in your area? Around here, they never did, but there was Bristol had Mountain Empire Comics, which is 60 miles away, and then there was one in Roanoke. Now, at the time, Roanoke, and Scott Connor goes to that one in Roanoke. At the time, Roanoke was 3 hours, over 3 hours away um, back then, and the one in Roanoke was 60 miles away. Now, you also got to understand that was a different time. That was like next to impossible to get to when you're a kid and stuff, right? And then not only when you did go to Bristol, you had to talk everybody, your parents or whatever. You had to talk them into letting you going, take me over here. So it was. I don't think I really stepped into a comic book shop until 1989. I can't remember if it was 89 or 90, but I think it was 89. And it was like maybe twice a year you could get out there because your friends were into girls and stuff and all kinds of things going on. But that was a lot of back then, gas money and stuff. Real different. Considering your, da, 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 I've always been in an on and off relationship with comics. Reader 1717. Yeah, there we go. That's where we're at, man. You've been doing it for a while, and you get to a point where it's not all just the glow and excitement and stuff. I wonder if we ever crossed paths there at B and D back in the day before we knew each other. I think we did, Scott. I really do. I really do think that in the '90s or something, I think I saw you across the way a few times. Trouble with me is I like too many damn things. Yep. Um, I used to walk to the hospitals to buy them off the bookshelf, and trips to B and D were a treat. Oh, Dennis Hayes, he knows B and D. Nice. So, like I said, you reach that point, you do it for years and years and years and stuff like that, and you will look around and have some kind of burnout. You sit there like, what the hell have I done? Just kind of a mood thing. And I think that's normal with anything. You have other interests too, don't get me wrong, because the comic books as a collector, I think it's something in us to collect to begin with. It doesn't just mean we're stuck on comic books. I have figures, I had Star Wars toys, I would cut Far Side strips out. I mean, I've been into all those things. Got into music, like really into music, where I was teaching myself how to play bass and stuff, and got into a little community around there. It was the hair band time of MTV. Everybody was playing an instrument and stuff, right? So things like that. But once you're a collector, it's going to spread out to other things. I think being a collector is ingrained in us. I have VHS tapes, comic books, 80s memorabilia. Reader 1717, if you watch her channel, she's into the comic books and all sorts of things. You just end up finding things you like. But every now and then something will happen when you're a collector to bring back that excitement. You still go back. You kind of have to get a fix, and that's when you know you're hooked. You'll go into a comic book shop or just do anything, even if you don't buy anything, you'll look around and flip around. You'll go through your comic books and stuff, and then every now and then you'll have something to bring some excitement. For me, it was like the complete. It was Dark Knight Returns, but even bigger than that was Watchmen. And then all of a sudden, it's more you get to have. I started realizing I had stories to tell with this. Now I talked about this Watchmen book. Watchmen you couldn't get unless you were at a comic book shop. You couldn't get it. So I had Mark Grunwald's Squadron Supreme. That was my Watchmen. That was coming out the same time as this Watchmen. And Watchmen was not a huge hit when it came out. That's what you got to understand. People who read it loved it or said a few things about it, but it was accessible. If you really got to a comic book shop, it was not selling off the stands. Uh, and it kind of gained momentum. And then this first trade came out. Trades were not big back then. All of a sudden, you're getting this excitement because now they're collecting comic books, and it's not the rare thing where there's this. You know what I mean? Like a bunch of Marvel 2-in-1s and stuff or something like that. But they started doing this. So the way I got this trade is I remember I went and got a bunch of books. Some older guy had it, and we met in a parking lot. In a video I called "Where Little Howler Mouse Bought His Comics" from 1979 to 99, I show you the parking lot, and it was like a drug deal go down. I whipped out some comics. He gave me this book. I put them back under my shirt and walked away in a parking lot. It was so funny, right? But all of a sudden, things got kind of sophisticated. You'll find those stories and stuff where it's fresh and new, and you're like, you didn't. They really expanded on what comics could be and stuff, right? And then for me, that's what I mean. You'll find those things that'll excite you and stuff. Maybe it's a character or anything like that on the story. But for me, it was always like the crossovers, seeing these heroes cross over with people from other companies and stuff. Even though DC owned this, I think you get the idea. The Teen Titans versus X-Men and stuff. You would hear about these things. You would see ad for these things, and you couldn't get them on the newsstand. The Complete Frank Miller Batman is my favorite book in my collection. The story behind that book, when my grandmother got it for me, there's a fire. I'm going back in the house to get it out. Also want to to another place in Nova called Hole in the Wall Books. Northern Virginia. Oh, Northern Virginia. Yeah, we've talked about Hole in the Wall, that store and stuff, right? Watchmen. I only read it this year. I tell you what, John. I swear, when it comes to the Dark Knight, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and Watchmen, I wish in Crisis on Infinite Earth, I wish I could go back and read it for the first time again. I've never had that Dark Knight Returns and the Watchmen. I've never had any stories in any medium, pulp novels or anything like that, affect me the way those did. There was a feeling there I would love to be able to recapture the first time I read them, not knowing what was going to happen. What are they doing? Lately, I've been focusing on a genre. Even before October, my buying habits have been directed by various age of horror and sci-fi comics. Now, that's one of the next things that can happen, man. You start refining your taste and refining your collection. You start, whatever led Reader 1717 to that, whatever led me to the same thing. I know what she's talking about, but you start refining your collection. You're like, if I'm going to carry this stuff around, if I'm going to spend the money, if I'm going to have that thrill, if I want to stay happy with it and stuff, you start going back. And for me, it was like completing series like Atari Force and things like that. It goes back to being a very personal hobby, even though by this time you probably found comic book fans, probably going to conventions, the thrill of the hunt. You got the nose for going out there. I mean, you become a seasoned collector and you can find this stuff. You become knowledgeable about books, even if you're not into the value anymore. You know what the keys are, and then all of a sudden you start refining things. And I totally get what she's saying. Watchmen is definitely a touchstone. It opened your mind to what you can do in comics that you can't do in the other mediums. Yeah, and this is the perfect form. I have the individual issues, the absolute Watchmen and stuff, but there's nothing like having the trade where you can just sit down, maybe with a cup of coffee or some wine or something, and you sit there and you read it and you flip back and forth. This thing is designed with the panels and the repetitiveness and I hate not repetitiveness in a negative way, but there's images that go back and forth you need to find and look at. This shows you there's no other way the story could actually be told and have the full experience. This is everything a comic can be at that point in time. If you've been reading for years, your collecting takes many different paths, which is awesome. Yeah, you start experimenting with other books and taking chances. Yeah. From my 6 to 16, I bought a lot of comics from a guy selling on a little street stand. Never had a nice word or smile from him. It was exactly like the Soup Nazi. No comics for you. Oh, this is funny. Oh man, guys, definitely check out the comments now. They're mind the comics and Charlton 66 and all of them are talking pretty funny stuff here. I was very cautious to read much DC until watching Mr. Haller. He hasn't steered me wrong yet. Not so sure about reading Watchmen yet, though. That's funny. There some of the things. Comic fan, yeah. I mean, when I recommend books and stuff, it comes from the books that I think are actually good stories. I'm one of those people, story first and then art second. Um, so when I read something and I remember it and I have to have it and I do that things, I get nervous recommending books sometimes because I don't want anybody to waste money. But that's why I say find it cheap, and if you like it, you can upgrade from there. I had one just like that. He was actually annoyed to have to turn around and take the comics off the shelf for me. Oh, this is awesome. Okay, there's people that are just talking away, man. But the evolution of comic, and then all of a sudden you get to a point with the comics. I think in the evolution of it, where you know you refine your stuff. You get a little bit of. Well, I use the word refine your collection stuff, which is real, which is fine stuff. But all of a sudden you reach a point where you've read for so long, you've seen so many things. With me, I don't like the recycling of the heroes. There's going to be something there with I think with the modern comics and stuff. You reach a point you're not a slave to a little bit of an addiction. You can kind of back up and think about things you wanted. And I've upgraded some books. I remember some ads of comics and stuff, and all of a sudden you kind of go back to the beginning, if you will, and you start grabbing those books. And that's what I've never met. I've never really sat down and talked with people who have collected as long as I have. And there's, believe me, there's tons of people that have collected longer. Don't get me wrong with that comment there, but I'm kind of that's what made me think about this. I'm doing this thing now where I'm going back and I'm wanting some like Legion stories that I saw the ads for from Bronze Age books and things like that. Find some books I was curious about to look around and stuff. Right, I've got one book on eBay that I'm keeping an eye on and stuff. Right, so it's kind of like you slow down and you start getting the opportunity to take whatever budget you have to go out there and kind of go back to the beginning. I think it goes full circle with the collecting. Now, the other thing is that I talked about the getting the money up and the budgeting and stuff like that. Now, I don't know if this is actually a part of the evolution of a comic book collector, but what I ended up doing is when the comic book prices were shooting up in the 90s, early 90s, like they jumped from 75 cents to a dollar 25 to a dollar 50 to a dollar 95 or something like that, all within like a year and a half. The way I remember it and stuff, I was like, no, I'm out and stuff, and I started finding ways to take my comics and some art that I was doing and stuff. And for years, I would start finding comic books for cheap, flea markets, yard sales, people wanting to get rid of their collection and things like that. And it's honestly for over a decade, I don't think I ever actually touched my paycheck for a comic book. It was all within itself. Which was kind of cool and stuff like that. I got into the trading part of it and stuff, right? So maybe a part of the collection is if you get into the willing and dealing of it. Now you also got to understand it wasn't just comic books that I was willing and dealing and haggling with. It was pretty much everything, you know. I have a washer and dryer downstairs that I was able to get for a really rare Xbox game when it first came out. You know, it was all about just the opportunity. I can't set out and go do this stuff, but if I just kind of keep an open mind about it and kind of keep it at the tip of my brain, I'll find the opportunities. I wish we had a half price chain around here. Uh, okay, Tom Bagley. I read Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run last year. And this year I picked up Mark Miller's run in trades. It's good, but it felt like Moore's run on speed. Tom Bagley, mind the comics. Um, he's a channel. He's in the comments section. And Paulo, Mind the Comics, Comic Crack, and I. About once a month, we've been doing a live show, and we're doing one today, 5:30 Eastern, where we've been going through the volumes of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. So check it out. I was actually going to shoot maybe an extra video later to kind of plug it and stuff, but we're doing that today. And Mind the Comics should have the other two up in his videos if you really want to talk Swamp Thing. Started college in '89, and that price hike was what caused me to dip as well. Yep, yep, that was unreal. I mean, that was a shitty time, man. The way they were hitting it like that. I remember somewhere in one of my Bronze Age books, there's an actual editorial, a couple paragraphs where they are apologizing to the fans for a 5 cent price hike, and they're explaining exactly why they have to do the 5 cent price hike. Plus, they're warning us that it could happen again in a few years. So that was really cool for me to find that in a comic, and I'm always wondering what comic I did it in. I don't know if it was a DC or a Marvel and stuff, but that blew me away. Follow our hangout on Swamp Thing later today. There you go. Mind the Comics popped right up there. Let me some Swamp Thing. I need to check that out. Cool. Thanks for the info. All right, guys. So basically, that's where we're at. The evolution of a comic book collector. There's ups and downs, and there's things where you change with the world. It's all to me. It's always one of those things where you sit down and it's you and the comic. I mean, there's bare basics, and then it's like the longer you're into it and things like that, the more you can filter the bullshit, if you will, refine your comics, get knowledgeable about it, and you end up having comic books can lead you down roads. Any kind of hobby, I think it is, will lead you down a road to meet people and stuff, right? I could also do a whole video on what this pursuit, this little hobby has done for all the people that I met, all the places I've went. It's really odd. I mean, when you think about it, just being like a little comic book that you're reading and stuff, the opportunities that this hobby has opened up for me goes way beyond anything I could have imagined. I actually would have laughed if I heard some of this stuff when I was a kid. Um, but you reach a point, I think, where you start wanting to give back to the hobby in some way. You want to share the stories. You want to recommend books to people. Um, and that's the part where I think I'm kind of at or been in and stuff. So that's kind of why, that's one of the reasons I kind of made this video. I'm trying to figure out where I'm at now, because now it's like I'm wanting, I don't know, is it a YouTube thing where I do the videos and I try to think of ideas, or is it really one of those things where I'm so full that I want to just kind of like, let everybody get a drink there and recommend little things and answer questions and stuff, right? And the biggest thing about the evolution of the comics is that I think I have never ever stopped being, a part of me has stopped being that 4 year old little kid who wants to know more. You get what I'm saying? I've never had the attitude that I know it all, and I've never had when I get corrected on stuff, even on live shows or in my comments or in real life and stuff, I never get mad. I never, I don't have an ego about it, man. I've always had that little piece of me that wants to know more. Let me know. Let me hear it. I love talking. I love learning about this stuff. So it's just a little bit of a passion. So I think that's, no matter where I've evolved in my collecting and stuff, I think I've always kept that passion there, even with the burnout or looking around and saying what I did and the rough times and the shitty Marvel books and the way things have been the last couple years in comics. There's always, I kind of like that. I kind of dig that. I think that's a gift of collecting. You get to keep a little magic of that little kid in you as you grow up. Oh, here we go. Yep, I made legit friends from this comic book thing. Yep. DC did that when they went from 10 to 12 cents. Seems small, but that was a two. Yes, Eric Bean. That's it. It was a two cent hot price hike. Nice. I would love to find whatever book I have that has that in there. I'll need to look it up. As a shy guy in high school, I met my best friend when he saw I pulled out my Wizard the magazine. That wasn't a euphemism, right? That's what I'm getting at. People are all having the same experience. I'm in my mid 40s and I'm still learning. I can't believe how much I haven't read. Yeah, that's what's cool about this. Even with the comic books being real shitty in the last couple of years. I mean, seriously. I mean, let's be real. I've talked about people getting the back issues and exploring things and stuff, and um, Scott Connor is one of those people who he's in there, and Charlton 66 and stuff. They're into different stuff, or they're more knowledgeable about certain areas of comics and stuff. And when you talk to them, that's one of the ways you can learn more stuff and everything like that. Yeah. Right, cool, man. All right, guys. Well, I think we're gonna have to wind this down a little bit, man. 28 people watching, that is rock star numbers here for it. Like this video, share this video, give it a thumbs up, do whatever. Let's get it out there. Um, in all honesty, really, I think I would like to see more channels come out that talk about comics again or about the hobby and stuff, man. So at least maybe we can find more people and stuff like that. Would you talk about letterers? Yeah, maybe at some point in time. Once you find out about European comics, you realize how much is out there that you haven't exposed to yet. Maybe some other video material. I don't know. Now Scott brought up the fact about other people, your other artists that you just don't see like in America, right? And it was thanks to heavy metal back in the day that I quickly realized that uh, even though comic books came from America, America does not own it. It's one of those things. Mobius, okay. Just the last couple of years, I've been reading Tardy, even though I've had a book by him since 2001. Paulo, I think just did it. Paulo Costo, I think just did a video on Italian comics. There's other things out there with your collecting and stuff. And all roads lead to other things and stuff. Superstars from all over the place. All right, later there. Yeah, later. Charlton 66, been digging the Legion. I saw where you read the Great Darkness saga, man. When you get to Legion of Three Worlds, man, I want to hear all about that one. I love those. All right, guys. Mobius is the man. One of us, Charlton 66. All right, guys. That was a great show. Thanks for everybody popping in. Be excellent to each other. And I will check you guys later. All right, later.